Today we're going to talk about how to lead discussions with a whole group novel. But I hope that you'll be able to take away some ideas from this process and be able to implement them in different grade levels or with different novels. It took us about 4 weeks to read through this novel. Let me see, it is 276 pages. And they did the majority of their reading at home. So when I handed out their copies of their books to them, I gave them a book, I gave them a bookmark also, and then I gave them a reading schedule as well. And there are not titles to these chapters, and so I just broke down the different chapters and how many pages were in each one. And we set up a reading schedule. In longer chapters, I gave them a couple of days to read, but then if it was like a really short chapter, sometimes I'd just have them read it in one night. So they were expected to come to class having read whatever chapter we were discussing. So I would assign them the chapters, and then we did this whole unit paperless. I didn't have them like keep a packet. So I created a really simple Google Doc, and it just had 6 questions for each chapter. So since the chapters didn't have titles, the first thing that I asked them is, what title would you give this chapter? And then write a 3 to 5 sentence summary of the chapter, use specific character names and specific events that occurred. The next section, I wanted them to include 3 to 5 unfamiliar or not very familiar words, and if they wanted to, they could add a picture of whatever that thing was. So for us, since there were a lot of just like cultural things that my kids didn't know what those things were, so they were able to copy and paste an image in, or they could copy and paste a definition. And then I had them put in a powerful quote from this chapter and why they chose it. The next section was a historical or current event connection, and a lot of times they would add this in like after we had our discussion. And the last box was personal response after discussion. So they were allowed to just type in what they said in our daily discussions, or like if somebody else had made a really good point, they could include that. So they were expected to fill out like at least a little bit of that before they came to class, just so they would be prepared. But what we did for our daily class periods is I moved all of my desks so that we were in a big circle. It's kind of like a big oval, and I sat in that oval, so I just taught, within the circle for the last month, and everybody contributed to the discussion. And normally the discussion would take like 35 minutes. And then they would have another 10 minutes at the end that I would allow them to work on their Google Doc while those ideas were still fresh in their mind. So technically, even if they hadn't read the chapter, or if they just like were very intimidated by the reading and felt like they couldn't do the reading, they were hearing from 34 other students in their class every day. They were hearing a little bit of commentary from me, so they were still able to like engage with the story and engage with the book and fill in at least some of those sections in their Google Doc notes. So at everybody's desk, I had these little cards that I made up, and these are little discussion cards that I would put the little discussion card in there at every person's seat, and then they had to make a comment either from that discussion card, or they could just make any comment that they wanted, but it's kind of nice to have like a little prompt. So the prompts on there are: one quote that I thought was powerful was, the event that I was most surprised by was, the character I was most impressed with was, one theme in this chapter was, something I didn't understand in this chapter was, this reminded me of, or what I think might happen next is. So they could use any of those sentence starters to make their comment, and then once they had commented, they would play their card. And so then when I was looking around, I could see who had already spoken and who hadn't. I also wrote little numbers on the back of those cards, and so if just nobody was really speaking up, I would just call out a number and they would have to go. So there were different ways of just like getting kids to talk. And so again, if somebody didn't really read much, or they didn't really understand their reading, like that was one of the options. You could say, something I didn't understand about this chapter was, or you could just say, one quote that I liked from this chapter, and just like read anything out of the book, really. So again, my main point wasn't to make sure that every single kid had read every single word, but every single day kids were discussing this book. They were coming to class, hearing other people talk about the book. We would read through like certain sections, and some of it we would read out loud together, but it was kind of like after the fact. We would go back and look a little bit closer at certain sections, and so every kid by the end of this book knew what it was about. They had spent 4 weeks of their school career discussing it. Even if they had to fake their way through a little bit, they're still gaining those skills. And I would give them points, like in our grade book, you know, discussion points for participating in that. And then I also gave them points for their chapter notes. And I did a check at like chapters 1 through 6. I graded all those, and then now we're done, so I'll grade chapters 7 through 12, just to try to keep them from falling too far behind.